My biggest fear with all this is that we're on the verge of a massive crime wave. This is decades of austerity measures, budget cuts, and now cuts have consequences.
This is absolutely not what the British public want. We do not want serious sexual and violent offenders out early on the streets.
We are working with victims, and we've been very clear that there will be 7,500 spare cells as a result of this.
But you're not being clear about who's being released, are you? So just to that question, we're talking about child rapists, groomers, domestic abuse perpetrators, killers. Do you know how many of those will be released? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. I'm Jackie Long. It's perhaps one of the most unsettling examples of Britain's crumbling public services. The government is set to release thousands of prisoners early, with warnings that killers, rapists and sex offenders could be among those leaving prison sooner than expected. For victims, many of whom have had to wait years for convictions, it's another sign of a justice system not fit for purpose. Survivors have told us of their shock and fear that their offenders could potentially be at large soon. Labour's former safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips, has called for child rapists to be excluded from the scheme, saying there should be more exemptions, while the Conservatives have branded the plans disgraceful. The government says it inherited a prisons crisis with overcrowding forcing difficult decisions and insists that those affected will be informed and supported. Well, later I'll be speaking to Prisons Minister Lord Timpson. But first, we're joined now by Amy Clowrey, a solicitor who specialises in child sex abuse cases, and Mark Fairhurst, the chair of the Prison Officers Association. Thank both of you for coming in. Amy Clowrey, you're a solicitor who represents many women and young girls who've been victims of grooming and rape. Tell me, when you first heard that the women were being told this might be happening.
I had a call from a client to tell me that they'd received a letter, and quite honestly, I thought it was an error. I assumed it was an administrative error. But on the same day and the consecutive days, a number of my clients then received the same letter, and it became apparent that actually it was something that was due to happen. And the overriding emotions of my clients were fear and concern for their safety and well-being.
And what were they telling you about that?
Some of them are thinking about moving out of area. Some of them have just had a complete mental health crisis and had to reach out to the crisis teams. Some of them have just been in floods of tears and haven't actually digested the news yet and how they're going to deal with it.
The letters so far alert victims to the fact their perpetrator might be eligible for early release. I wonder, is there any comfort or reassurance that this only might happen?
No, I think actually the fact that they've received a letter saying it might happen is disgraceful. I think they should have been only contacted if it was a certainty. I've had clients that have said to me, why are they telling me 3 months early that it might happen? I've now got to worry for the next 3 months. And actually the fact that they were told by letter as well is just disgusting. And they should have been contacted by telephone to explain this to them in full. It's just not not survivor focused at all.
I mean, Mark, you're sort of shaking your head in agreement, yet this is essentially being done for your members, for the prison system as a whole. Is it the right thing to do?
It is, and unfortunately, although I disagree and don't think it's justice, for example, a perpetrator of a crime getting sentenced to 9 years is only going to serve 3 years in custody. That, to me, is not justice. And it's a necessary evil because we're so overcrowded and because this is decades of austerity measures, budget cuts, closing prisons, not enough cell spaces, and now cuts have consequences, and this is part of the consequences. But there need to be exemptions for serious sexual offenders and violent offenders. But there are no exemptions. This applies to all prisoners on a standard determinate sentence. So there will be, as you say, by next June, at least 6,000 early releases because of this new legislation. And
exactly as you point to, this is about the sentence, not the offence. So anybody, any offender of any crime apart from the most serious could be eligible for early release. Is that your understanding?
So unless you're on an indeterminate sentence for public protection, unless you're in for murder, if you're serving a standard determinate sentence, you will be released at the third point of your sentence as opposed to the 40%. And this proves, doesn't it, what Amy's just said, that this has gone under the radar, and only now, months before the releases start in September, did the public realise and the victims realise what's going on. So were the victims actually consulted enough during these recommendations? I'm all for reducing the prison population so we've got a chance to rehabilitate people. But it needs to be done in the right way, and the best way to do it is for people to earn the right to get released early by their good behaviour and conformity in prisons.
I mean, the government say this is part of that this act, isn't it?
That was a suggestion from David Gork, but it applies across the board that once you hit the third point of your sentence, and it applies retrospectively as well, that you will be released. So what we're saying is, are the support services in place? Is there enough accommodation for people to go into? How many people getting released are going into full-time employment? What are the safeguards in place for the victims to ensure they're not contacted?
But you still want it done, though?
We want the prison population reduced, but it can be done so much better. It doesn't have to go down this road. You're spending billions on new build prisons. We don't need new build prisons. We need secure mental health institutions in our communities to rid the prisons of people with acute mental health conditions. We need support services in our communities for people with addictions. We need to help people change their lives rather than release them early onto an overworked and under-resourced probation service, which is now under increased pressure.
And we'll come to exactly that in a few moments. But it is a necessary evil.
Unfortunately, at this point.
Do you agree? Do you accept that?
I accept that there should be some early releases, but I don't think that the most serious offences, so violent offences or sexual offenders, should be released early. I think that they're a massive risk to society, in particular women and children.
And what do you think of the fact that despite repeatedly asking, they haven't been able to tell us exactly, among those people being released, who they are? You know, what offences they've carried out?
I just think it's appalling. I just think there's going to be no faith in the government or the justice system, and they need to look at what that knock-on effect is, because at the moment this is absolutely not what the British public want. We do not want serious sexual and violent offenders out early on the streets. And I think they just need to really look at the decisions they're making. You talk about them being serious offenders. Well, when we first broke this story, Fiona Goddard, who you know well, who was groomed and raped as a child, someone who took years to get some sort of justice, she told us that this was like her justice being taken away from her. Now, the response at the time from the Ministry of Justice was, really serious offenders will not be released under the scheme. I wonder what both of you make of the fact that the government seem to think child rapists, groomers, exploiters, sexual abusers are not necessarily serious offenders by this definition.
I think they may be referring to the early release schemes that we've introduced since the beginning of the year, not this legislation. This legislation is clear. A standard determinate sentence is eligible for release at the third point of their sentence. And let's be honest, the early release schemes haven't helped, because for every 4 prisoners we release, 3 of them come back, they either breach the licence or they reoffend. But probation staff are being told now, under no circumstances, unless it's extremely serious and there's a risk to the public, do you recall prisoners? So this is all going under the radar, and the public need to wake up and challenge this, because we need to do things better. There's an easier way to reduce the prison population, and that's to invest in services in our communities, in robust community sentences, and invest in the probation service so they can monitor people.
I mean, the government is insisting that this will be a safe move. It says there will be intensive supervision. You know these types of offenders, Mark. Are you convinced that the processes in place are rigorous enough that every prisoner who might be released won't end up being a danger?
Well, when they say intense supervision, what they mean is an ankle tag, a GPS tag fitted by a company that has failed this government in the past and failed the public in the past. And what do they mean by intense supervision? They haven't got enough probation staff to cope with what they're dealing with now. By next June, there'll be over 6,000 releases. In September, there'll be 700 alone. That's 700 extra people to supervise from probation staff. They haven't got the staffing levels to do that.
The Public Accounts Committee described it as failing and on the brink of collapse a couple of months ago, even before this begins. So what confidence do you think the women you represent will have that this will be a safe process?
The women that I represent already feel like it will not be a safe process, because they've been failed and failed and failed again by people that should have protected them. Many of them have had concerns about the men when they've been in prison, and the threats that they've received whilst they've been in prison. So for them to be released early and for these promises to be made, that there'll be these safeguards in place, it's just not sticking.
I mean, the government are talking about hundreds of millions they're spending on the probation service, recruiting huge numbers of probation officers.
Recruiting staff doesn't happen overnight. They have to be interviewed, they have to pass assessments, they have to be vetted, they have to be trained. So now you've got a really inexperienced probation workforce who are only new to the risks that they're supposed to assess. So it's all going to take time. My biggest fear with all this is that we're on the verge of a massive crime wave, because I don't think there's support services in place for people we're releasing.
Amy Clowrey, I mean, they are talking about how these victims will be listened to. Jake Richards, the minister, said it in the House of Commons the other day, that they want victims at the heart of this. They will listen to them. What do you think victims will say?
I think, frankly, the politics has been tit for tat on this issue, and child sexual exploitation is serious, and it needs to be dealt with better by the government. I listened to the debate in the Commons the other day, and it was just appalling the way in which it was handled. And survivors are seeing all of this, they watch all of this, and I think they're just completely disheartened. There's a complete lack of trust. They are not wanting to engage with the child sexual exploitation inquiry that's coming up. I've had a number of clients say to me, what's the point? What's the point in me engaging? I'm not listened to. What difference will it make? They're looking at these early releases. How are they supportive of violence against women and girls? They're not. So I just think it's just really negatively impacting survivors' mental health and their trust in professionals.
What was wrong with the debate the other day? What do you think? Why were victims upset by it? The minister kept repeating that we will listen to victims, they'll be at the centre of how this is done, they will be supported, that's why we're notifying them early.
Absolutely, but when you think about how they've been notified early, they've received an email. That's not acceptable. When you look, underneath the carpet, the way in which they're being treated isn't the way in which the minister is describing in the debate at all. And then to hear arguments about, this is a result of conservative failures. People,
they inherited a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. But what the public want to hear is how they're going to solve it, and not a tit-for-tat debate about serious issues. And I think survivors just feel like they are always being kicked, is how I would describe it.
The truth is, though, how do you square that circle between relieving the pressure on prisons and protecting victims and delivering for them what many of them want, which is for this not to happen? You give a long list of things that we know would improve the system, it would improve things in the community. That's not going to happen right now.
So change the criteria.
So the truth is, what do they do now?
Change the criteria and listen to the voices of the victims so they do feel safe.
But the voice of the victims is saying don't do this.
For serious sexual offenders and violent offenders, maybe domestic abusers, you would feel vulnerable, wouldn't you? Knowing via email, just a few short months before the release date, that your perpetrator is getting out. That's not good enough. They need to do better.
I'm in complete agreement. I think there needs to be exemptions, and the government really need to revisit this legislation ASAP.
I mean, we don't know because they're not being very transparent about the numbers. But if there were exemptions, it's possible that they wouldn't get enough people out to relieve the pressure that they keep talking about.
I doubt that very much because, as you know, Jackie, we came close to collapse not so long ago. But we will always find a space for the most serious offenders. We will always do that. We always have, and we always will. So let's not have the excuse from the government.
I mean, that's not what the government said when they talked about only having 100 places.
They did only have 100
and the criminal
spaces.
system was on the verge of collapse.
They did, but we would have provided spaces. We wouldn't have let that happen. And we've got...
But how do you do that without letting people out?
Well, you've got early release schemes where there were exemptions on the early release schemes. There doesn't seem to be exemptions on this new legislation. So just change the criteria. Sit down with the voice of the victims, with people who represent them, with solicitors like Amy who deal with them, and listen to the argument from them and change the criteria so people feel safe.
I absolutely agree with him. I've got nothing to add, really. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I haven't heard of any consultation going on in relation to this act. If it has been, we haven't been involved, and certainly none of my clients have said that they've been involved at all. I think that the government need to start listening to the people that these decisions affect. I
mean, perhaps extraordinarily, you had the former Minister for Violence Against Women and Girls, Jess Phillips, stand up and say to her colleague, we need exemptions. What are we doing here? What has happened, do you think? Is this unintended consequences? They thought we need to get 7,000 and 9,000 out in the next year and they haven't thought this through. Or, perhaps worse, they have thought it through, they've realised the impact on victims and done it anyway. What's your best guess?
My hope is that it's unintentional, because I think if it was intended that, the most serious offenders like child rapists and, murderers, etc., and those that have committed serious domestic violence incidents, then that is disgrace. It's just disgraceful, isn't it? I don't really have anything else to add to that. So I just hope that it was an unintended consequence and that we can therefore now reverse that. But the way in which it's been debated in the House would seem to me that actually it wasn't an unintended consequence. It seemed to me that the Labour government are standing by the decisions they've made. I hope that changes. I hope that they rethink it.
I mean, the probation officers union have told us today that they have a vote of no confidence in their leadership in the prison service. You're talking about a potential crime wave. I mean, where does this end from your point of view?
I think this has been a panic measure with unintended consequences, which we're yet to experience. If you think by the end of June next year, there'll be over 6,000 releases. How many of those people will come back? And most of them will come back for reoffending because there's no support for them in our communities, because there's a lack of investment in the system over the years. We need to be cleverer about this. But in this particular instance, the immediate thing this government needs to do is sit down and listen and change the criteria.
But I return to the point, because we don't know the numbers, it's very difficult to know what that might do to their intended aim of around 7,000 freed up spaces. If they took out child rapists, groomers, domestic abusers, sexual abusers, and victims of all of those terrible crimes would have a very good argument for there to be an exemption on that. How would they get to the numbers that they're looking at to relieve the pressure on a system they say is on the verge of a collapse?
Well, I look at it a different way, because when you build a new prison, you will always fill a new prison. And when you've got prison spaces, you will always fill those spaces because of the backlogs in the courts. So this has been a panic measure. It's been ill thought out because they quite clearly haven't consulted with victims of crime. So let's have a rethink. Let's do it before it's too late, and let's just listen to people who are really worried about people getting released at the third point of the sentence. They've only been given a couple of months' notice. Imagine how worried those people are now.
And just to follow on, I know you mentioned that there'll be a potential crime wave. You also need to think about the implication that this is going to have on the victims and their mental health, because it could lead to a bigger mental health crisis than we've already got. Just the conversations I've had this week, people are really, really struggling to deal with the fact that somebody that has, really hurt them in horrendous ways might be released early. So if that's one person and there's 6,000 people potentially being released, think about how much pressure that's going to put on the mental health service.
And it's difficult to describe, isn't it, just how desperate some of these women are?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to need support for themselves and their families.
I just want to ask a couple more, if I may. As I say, this is a government that, put as one of its highest priorities violence against women and girls. What message is this sending out, not just to the women who have already been victims of terrible crimes, but to those who might be considering whether to go to the police, who might be thinking, do I embark on that now?
Well, interestingly, I had a conversation yesterday about this. One of my clients had spent 8 years going through various trials in relation to her perpetrators because it was part of a child sexual exploitation gang. And some of her perpetrators will now potentially be out in less years than she spent fighting for justice. So what justice where is the justice there? That there isn't any. It makes people think, why would I bother? Why would I bother putting myself through, going through years of trauma to help put these people away for them to be released early? Because it will have a detrimental impact upon me and my family. So what's the point? And that's the attitude that I've felt from my clients this week.
Very briefly, your message to the Minister.
Please sit down with the victims of crime, listen to their plea to you and change the criteria. We will have space. We've got over 2,000 spaces as it stands now. We will always have space. Change the criteria.
I don't understand how you say you'll always have space.
We'll always have space. We've always had space in the past. We'll always have space in the future. We will jiggle things around. There are people who are low risk to the public, who quite rightly should be released at the third point. That's fine. But high-risk offenders who've committed serious crimes and the victims are worried, that criteria needs to change.
And Amy, from the women themselves that you talk to all the time, from the victims you talk to?
I would absolutely echo that. But what I would also say is that there needs to be some support measures put in place for the people that have already received this correspondence, because they are seriously struggling with their mental health as a result of what decisions have been made so far.
Amy Clowrey, Mark Fairhurst, thanks very much for talking to us today. Lord Timpson, how many rapists, child abusers, domestic abusers will this government be releasing early?
Well, what is clear is we inherited a crisis in our justice system. We were running out of prison cells. We had one day where we had less than 100 cells, so we had to take this very difficult action. And what we are doing is making sure we have a sustainable justice system. So for victims of these horrendous crimes, we're working with them, communicating with them to ensure that they know exactly what's going on. We're completely transparent with them. And so when their perpetrators are released, our exclusion zones are correct and the licence conditions work in the interests of the victims.
So the perpetrators will be released, and you say that you're doing right by victims by notifying them. But on that specific question, how many rapists, child abusers, domestic abuse perpetrators, killers will the government be releasing early as part of this new Sentencing Act?
So we've been very clear. There are 18,000 prisoners who are not part of this scheme at all. But for the others that are, we are working with victims, and we've been very clear that we know that there will be 7,500 spare cells as a result of this.
But you're not being clear about who's being released, are you? So just to that question, we're talking about child rapists, groomers, domestic abuse perpetrators, killers. Do you know how many of those will be released, and are simply not willing to tell us, or you just don't know?
Jackie, that is not the case. So what is happening at the moment is our teams in prisons, they are incredible teams working this out. It's very, very complex what they're doing. They're working now, as we speak here, to work out exactly when everybody is going to be released. And the first thing they will do is notify the victims. So it's important that we get it right. It is a moving target. So it is impossible for us to say exactly who will be released where and when, but we're working fast to ensure that victims know first.
But just to be clear, because the public are also interested in this, all of those groups will potentially be released early. Rapists, abusers, domestic abusers.
And the reason why we have to do that is to ensure that there are prison cells available, because it is very dangerous to run out of prison places. We do not want to go back to where we were when we came into government, where we had to make very difficult decisions, because we always need to have a cell, because we recall we recall people who are on the streets and behave badly, and it means that we need to have space for police to arrest people and to lock them up.
I want to put to you what a couple of the women have told us. Evie's stepfather sexually abused her when she was a child. He was due to serve 10 years in jail. Now he may be free within months. She told us, I deserved that 10 years with him locked up. She says it is cripplingly terrifying that he might be out soon. Carol is also terrified, raped by her father as a child. She says this: you are passing on your problem, overcrowded prisons, to us, the victims. What do you say to those women? Well,
the crimes that these women have faced are horrendous. And that is why, as a government, we've committed to halve the number of women who are violated by men by half.
But this surely completely fights that.
Well,
releasing rapists, sexual abusers, domestic abuse perpetrators flies in the face of halving violence against women and girls.
Jackie, the previous Conservative governments closed 23 prisons. If I had those 23 prisons open today, we would not be having this conversation. But I need to make sure the public are kept safe. And the way we keep them safe is ensuring that we always have a cell door for someone to look behind if the police arrest them and want to charge them. So that is what we need to do to have a sustainable justice system that is safe. That is the safe way for victims today and victims of the future. We have to have a prison cell available for everybody.
But the question is, people will raise, their concerns that they don't believe this is safe. The government have said that there will be intensive scrutiny by the probation service. There will be a massive rise in tagging. All of this pressure on a probation service, just a couple of months ago, the Public Accounts Committee described as on the brink of collapse.
Well, we did inherit a justice system in crisis, and that's what I've been doing over the last 2 years.
Yes, but I'm talking about the reality of this situation. You talk about safety.
So let me explain, Jack. The 90% of our probation regions are performing better than they were last year. We've seen the biggest increase in electronic monitoring ever, and it is stable and it is working. We are investing £700 million extra. That's a 45% increase in probation. We're employing more staff than ever before. Probation is where the heavy lifting of the justice service is done, and our probation staff do an incredible job, but they haven't been supported for years, and what we're doing is supporting them and giving them all the tools they need to do an amazing job.
Well, unfortunately, the probation union, NAPO, told us today they are really concerned about their ability to cope, and that in truth means their ability to keep people safe.
Well, I look at the data every day. I come from a business where data is important and results and performance is important. And I can tell you that 90% of our probation regions are performing better than they were before. We've still got a lot to go, but these green shoots are everywhere I see. And tomorrow I'll be in Bristol and I'll be doing another probation roadshow, telling our amazing staff all the things we're doing to help them to get to the point where they can do the job they came in the service to do.
Sorry to interrupt you, there's so much to get through, but you are releasing thousands of prisoners, violent sexual offenders, at a time when the probation office service itself has been described as that breaking point. The unions say their officers are overwhelmed.
Well, by the end of this Parliament, there'll be more people in prison than ever before and more people in probation than ever before. And that's why we need all this extra investment into both services, but specifically probation. The number of, the average caseload of a probation officer is now come down to 32. It's much lower than it was. So we've still got more we've got a lot further to do, but the probation service is getting back to a point where it can do the job it is meant to do, and it's got the investment to do it.
So, briefly on this one, if you would, you have the extraordinary situation of Jess Phillips, the former Minister for Violence Against Women and Girls, a lifelong campaigner on this front, essentially in the House of Commons the other day begging the government to create exemptions for child groomers to properly protect victims. Will the government consider this?
Well, I've loved working with Jess when she was a minister with me, and we did lots of work together, and I know how passionate she is about this. But we always need to have a place to put a criminal in prison. And that is why we're having to make these difficult decisions, and that's how we need to support victims of the future too.
The chair of the Prison Officers Association has told us we will always find a place for prisons, that he thinks this is a dangerous move that you are making. He fears it will lead to a crime wave.
We've already built 3,100 new cells, and we're going to build more so we get up to 14,000. But we need to keep building more prison cells. The prison population is going to grow, but we also need to focus on reducing reoffending, because 80% of offending is reoffending. So it's not just about building new prisons that's important. It's not just about investing more in probation. It's about ensuring we have a system that works and a system that is safe.
A related story, the ringleader of the Rochdale grooming gang, Shabir Ahmed, is being released, we understand, tomorrow. But despite promises made by the government say he cannot be deported. Andy Burnham, the man who is expected to become the next leader of the Labour Party and the next Prime Minister, thinks that has to change. Can we assume that will change now?
Well, you are correct, Jackie, that he will be released tomorrow, and there's nothing we can do about that. But it is also true that deportations are up 36%. And I'm also aware that ministers are looking into this case. But it's a very complex area of deportation law, and we always need the agreement of other countries too. So I think the crimes that this vile man has committed are horrendous, and we need to do all we can when he's back in the community tomorrow to make sure the restrictions are as tight as possible. And if he does anything wrong, he'll be seeing the back of a prison cell door.
Andy Burnham says, like everyone, I want this vile criminal out of the country. I will ask Home and Foreign Secretaries to review all possible options. Is it your view also that this should change and that he should be deported? Something must be done.
Well, we certainly don't want someone who's committed these vile crimes wandering around the streets and the poor victims knowing that this person is wandering around the streets. We need to make sure that they are safe, and we need to make sure that the teams that are working on this get to work and get to work quickly.
Lord Timpson, thank you very much for your time today. Well, that is it from this episode of The Forecast. We'll see you next time.